We acknowledge the Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tomvangar, the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands, and the presence of LMU on this traditional, ancestral, and unceded land. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, study, create, and be in this place. Today's session is being recorded and will be archived with a link available on the KaleidoLA website. Today, I want to thank Molly Corey, Stancia Harvey, and my colleagues across the College of Communication and Fine Arts. Jasmine McNeil is an independent curator and art advisor who has been based in Los Angeles since 2016. Her curatorial practice focuses on the many aspects of Black identity and Black spirituality. She earned her BA in World Arts and Cultures from UCLA in 2016 and her MA in Cultural Studies from Leuven, I believe that's how it's pronounced, in Belgium in 2018. She has curated exhibitions locally and abroad, including in Ghana and in Belgium. She is the founder of Other Faith Art Consulting, an art consulting business and gallery which focuses on the inclusivity and representation of Black contemporary art. Most recently, Jasmine co-curated the 2021 acclaimed exhibition, Otherwise Revival, a group show that visualized the impact of the historic Black church, specifically the Black Pentecostal movement, on contemporary artists at bridge projects in Los Angeles. I'm going to hold up this extraordinary catalog that looks like a ghost image here because of my background. I met Jasmine this year in person when I visited the exhibition that she co-curated. And the day I went, I had the fortune of meeting her. I said, I would really love to meet the curator. And she said, oh, that's me. And so I felt extraordinarily privileged to be able to see the show when she was at the show, and invited her at some future date when we would all be able to convene for COVID in this way to LMU. I want to welcome her and am so excited to have her talk about her career and her interests in curatorial practice. And I welcome her to the virtual podium today at LMU. Welcome, Jasmine.
Hi, Karen, thank you so much. What a great introduction. And I love when we can start a space by acknowledging the land that we're on. So thank you for starting with that, as well as thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here. And I love being reminded about how we met because it was a perfect sequence of events. So thank you all so much for having me, for being here. My name is Jasmine McNeil. I'm a curator of contemporary Black art, and today's discussion is going to be surrounded not only about myself and my practice, but what curating is, as well as going into detail about Otherwise Revival and just the influence that it's had on my life, but as well as the process of putting on an exhibition such as Otherwise Revival. So before I start out, I'm just going to take care of a few housekeeping things. I'm going to be talking, and I talk a lot. So that's just what I want to start out with. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. But if you have anything super pertinent, please feel free to raise your hand in the virtual raising of hands. And I will, take your question, and we can, kind of have that fluidly go from there. So I will get started. So I went to UCLA starting in 2012. It was my undergrad. I had no idea what I wanted to do, as most of us do. If you think that you have it figured out, that's amazing. That's something that we you're very blessed to have, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I've always had a very strong hold over me when it came to art, especially visual art. I just didn't know what it was. And before I start out, there is no one way to enter the art world. And that's something that I will talk about a little bit later on, but there's no one way to do something or anything that you love to do. And that's a big idea that I have to remind myself of when I am experiencing maneuvering this business, because it is very independent and I get very caught up on a right way to do something, and it just doesn't exist. So just know that there's multiple ways to get to your dreams and to do the things that you love. Anyway, so I went to UCLA. I started out as an African American studies major, and I switched that to Soc, and I realized that I didn't enjoy learning about people enough to study sociology. So I was in a really big middle phase in my life, and then I took this museum studies class with a professor by the name of Polly Roberts, who was my beaming, guiding light to what being a curator was. And she passed away, so rest in peace to her. But I took this class with her, and she took us to the Fowler Museum on UCLA's campus, and I was completely just subdued to what this museum had in it and the feeling of it. I'd never been to a museum that made me feel something, and it felt like fireworks that went out. And it was like, I call it it was a spiritual connection that God, I say God, and whatever you choose is, up to your discretion. But for me, it was a direct relation to God communicating to me and letting me know that this was something that I was supposed to be doing. And so I spent every day, or every week at least, in that museum. And Polly Roberts, my professor, was a curator. And I was like, what is this? What the hell is a curator? And I just started following her and following her every move. And I went to office hours, and I did all the things that you're supposed to do as a student, but I was actually very intrigued by her. And another thing that I was intrigued about was that she was a Caucasian woman, but she called herself an Africanist. And I was like, I don't think that that's accurate. Like, how can you be an Africanist? So I had a lot of questions. And long story short, she told me and took me through what a curator was. And I curated my first virtual, that was a part of our project. We have to, curate a virtual show. And it was surrounded around double consciousness and what being African American or being hyphenated meant. And it just brought me so much joy and so much excitement to do something creative and to express myself in this way. So curating originally started out for me as a way of expressing myself and expressing my feelings around being Black, around being a woman, around art, all of it. And I'd never experienced such freedom before. So fast forward, I graduated, and again, still didn't know what was going on. And so I decided to get my master's. And I wasn't going to pay the 80 grand a year that it cost to go to school here. So I applied internationally, and I went to KU Leuven, which Karen was exactly right in her pronunciation, and pretty much continued my studies of cultural studies, and did the same thing in my master's thesis. And everything that I did was surrounded around decolonizing the museum, because the difference that I was starting to experience was being a Black woman and being a curator. I knew exactly what I wanted to do at this point after college, but it was around the fact that I didn't see other people that looked like me curating or being in the arts at all. The only Black people that I had seen in the museum were the museum attendants, the people that sit down and tell you that you're getting too close to the artwork, or people working in in the museum store. I never saw any art business professional that looked like me. And so I started questioning everything. Because at this point, it wasn't just the art professionals, it was the artists as well. Like, where were these Black artists? I know that we existed, but for some reason, these institutions were not showing me myself. And so I did my master's thesis on the lack of representation of Black artists in art history. And I've pretty much based my whole career and life off of this concept. And what I didn't know that it was preparing me for was just a much bigger story than myself. And I think it's still to this day, I don't actually know the magnitude of what God is preparing me for. So at this point in my master's thesis and in my, my studies, I'm very angry. I'm a very angry woman who is trying to figure out why I'm not being represented. So I come back after my graduation and I'm ready to work. So I started applying to all these museums and I market myself as a curator of contemporary Black art, and I get no hires. I get to like the third interview of every museum that I apply for, and none of them hire me. So now it's starting to mess with my ego. Like, am I not good enough? And what I realized, and what I'm continuing to realize, is that being good enough has nothing to do with it. It's about what the world is ready for. And the truth is that the world was not ready for a curator of contemporary Black art in an institution. And and for a lot of institutions, not that all of them, but for a lot of institutions, they still aren't ready. It's about 4 to 6% of Black women make up higher roles in museum institutions, and about 1% of Black artists are represented in these museum institutions. So these are statistics. These are just facts of letting you know right there that this is so much bigger than being good enough, than your art being good enough, than your skill set. It's rooted in colonization, and it's going to take decolonization in order to move forward. So I started going the outside route and applying to galleries. And so I developed my first curatorial proposal on my own in Los Angeles and got accepted. And so that's what I've been doing consistently. And it's been a lot better because now I'm able to be independent. I can curate a show, I can do what I love. And it's, of course, still dependent upon the gallery to choose it or not. But I get to decide what I want to see in a gallery space. And that means a lot to me as far as my mobility and how the world understands Black art. So that's just a brief introduction to who I am and how I got started. So what I really want to talk about is curating. Now, I don't have too many slides up. I'm much more of a talker than I am like a presenter. So I'm just going to go through a couple of key things that I believe curating is. So you hear this a lot, like curator, and it sounds very like fancy, and it's, to me, it sounds like a very bougie term. And a curator is so much more than that, and not that at all. So what a curator does, whenever you step into any museum or sometimes gallery spaces, and the order of the work on the wall, the color, the lighting, the theme, the writing, the text, a team of people usually comes up with what that theme is going to look like. And that team of people is usually a team of curators. And they each specialize in a different theme or a different form of art that they are able to be experts in. So, for example, you might see a curator of photography, or a curator of contemporary art, or a curator of the Americas. And all of these are different specializations that they've studied for, and they've put all of their career and intention into. And so why a curator is important is because art is a very broad spectrum. It's this grand scheme of things. We experience art every single day by doing the smallest things. Any video game that you like, any picture on social media that you are really engaged with is a form of art. And so curators help us to piece this together. They're pretty much the middle person between the art form, the art itself, and the institution. So they mend these two things together. And for me, a curator is the middle person between the artist and the business. And that's something that I'm just now learning as well. A lot of artists, especially emerging artists and artists that I work with, they don't know about the business side. They just want to make art. And so a lot of times you'll see an artist get like ripped off, or they'll sign a contract and they don't know anything about it and they don't get paid for it because they don't have the mend between the institution and the art itself. And so sometimes a curator acts as a middleman in that way as well. So for me, I bring the artists and it's up to me to follow up on them, see how they're doing, see if they're getting paid, and see if the institution wants to work with them again. So that's kind of the roles of what a curator does. So when I get into a space, I like to visit the space first. And then I kind of develop my proposal either based off of the artist that I know or something that I'm really passionate about. So for example, my first show was called Magician, the Black Body in Portraiture. And that was something that I had been developing literally since UCLA. I love portraiture, but I also love this essence of magic of the Black experience. And so I found artists that I thought would fit that proposal, but it was also hand in hand of being inspired by their artwork that felt very spiritual, that felt very magical, and that was also portraiture. And so usually that's what a curator does. Now, the difference in this is that I'm an independent curator. I don't belong to a home. I go to a space, make a proposal, and if they want to accept it, great. If not, then they don't have to. But a curator who works at a museum or works at an institution, they're on staff, they're on a team. So they meet monthly and weekly and discuss what would be good for the museum. And they have a whole lot of other factors that go into approving an exhibition or working on an exhibition. And so they just kind of roll them out. You'll see museums all the time have a different show with a different artist, but these artists and these curators are on staff. So they're not going out and hunting these people. They've acquired their work over time or it's been donated. And so all they pretty much have to do is come up with an idea that fits the museum as an institution and also, something that they want to work on as a team. And the difference of that compared to being an independent curator is that everything is legitly on my own. So a lot of times funding is on my own, which is why I try to pick a lot more Los Angeles based artists, because most of the time these artists are going to have to ship their own work or I'm going to have to ship it. A couple of times I brought artwork in my car, hoping and praying that it doesn't get messed up because I don't have the funds to pay for it if it did. And so the difference is that you just don't have that cushion. That's the difference between working with an institution and working independently, is that you literally have to find it on your own. But I do kind of find joy in that. It makes me scrappy. It helps me to think on my toes and think on my feet. And one day when I am able to have a space of my own, I'll know how to get there and I won't be dependent upon someone else to help me, and I'll know how to help myself. So like I said, there are different avenues of becoming a curator and maneuvering your way through the space. And, it's just up to you to decide which one you're willing and want to do. So curating style, I kind of want to walk you through that. So like I mentioned before, curating is based upon your specialization. And for me, I am interested in Black artists. Anything contemporary Black artists, I'm in it, I know about it, and I want to be integrated in. And so starting out from the very beginning, except maybe in college, I started scouting Black artists. And so my curating style and what I prefer is usually based off of that, as well as I'm a big fan of portraiture and figurative work, as well as abstract work. So most of the time I don't dibble and dabble with a lot of like performance art or installation works. I do want to get there one day, but what I really enjoy and have the best conversation with is, figurative and abstract work. And so those are my specialties, and that's what I choose to put on. And so my style is basically rooted in spirituality. So I have had a very tumultuous time with my spirituality. I grew up super religious. My grandma was a very religious woman. And at the time, we didn't know, but we know now she's also bipolar and schizophrenic. And so she just was very like erratic and kind of all over the place. And we didn't really know why. So even though she was very religious, she used to switch religions all the time. So one week I would be rubbing Buddha's belly, and then the other week I would be reading the Torah and studying Hebrew. And so I was very confused, to say the least. But my mom was very helpful in helping me to understand that my spirituality was inside of me. It's what I wanted it to be. And my relationship with God was very personal. And for a long time, as I got older and went through college and having different experiences, I got farther and farther away from my spirituality. And then right after college, something happened, and this switch just went off for me. And I was able to have that relationship. And sorry if you hear garbage outside. I live in Koreatown, for those who know Koreatown. So I started really digging deeper into my spirituality and realizing that anything that I did, my spirituality was not separate of. It was very much so integrated together. And anything that I do, I want it to be known that my spirituality, and as a Black woman, should be there and is extremely important. And so my focus as a curator is not just contemporary Black art, but it's also integrating how spirituality is an active part of Blackness. I believe deeply in my ancestors being from Africa and bringing their spirituality with them, and that it runs through my blood. So no matter what I did or do, it will always be with me, and I will never be without it. And so it's important for me to continue that narrative so people know that my Blackness isn't a mistake. It's so deeply on purpose, everything. And no matter what happens, that because of our spirituality as a community and as a people, nothing will be able to break us. And that's usually a part of the narrative of the stories that I try to tell when I am putting together a show. And it might seem redundant to some, but it's always something new for me. And so usually what I do, I'll reach out to an artist, I'll look at their work, study them for a while, and ask them if they want to be a part of the show. And so I'll either look at a few artists and develop my proposal from there, or like I said, I'll already have a proposal written. It's a mix. Lately, I've already have proposals ready to go, and my brain just needs to get them out. And so I'll contact the artists and see if they're on board, see if they're available, and I'll pick certain works to be in the show. Studio visits are huge as a curator. I'll let you know that right now. You have to do studio visits. You have to be active in going to different shows, different openings, to see who's active, who's relevant, as well as who is being integrated into shows. Because sometimes collectors won't go to a show if they don't know who the artist is. And so studio visits are important, going to their studios, seeing their work, seeing their process, because people are going to have questions about who these people are and how they create their work. After that, you pick the works. It's good to have a contract up, or to, have a contract written up. But usually if you're working with a gallery will do that for you. And so after you contacted the artist, it's all about communication after that. Back and forth, back and forth. Artists are probably, if there's any artists here, I mean, no disrespect, but they're the most fickle humans I've ever experienced. So I have to be a stalker and I have to be very, very on point with my communication when it comes to corresponding with artists, as well as the gallery. Galleries have deadlines. And as a curator, you need to make sure that, again, you're the middleman between the gallery deadline and the artists. And then after that, it's all about writing your proposal. So your curatorial notes, your statements, why the show is important, why the show is relevant, and all information about the artist, their bios, their CVs, their artist statements, and so forth. And then as the dates get closer, making sure that the artwork and the shipping is going to be there on time, having it shipped and brought to the right addresses. And then that's when the fun stuff happens. You get to start putting the work on the walls. And this is where the creativity for me really comes in. I enjoy every process of curating, maybe not the correspondence and the communication. I don't really like that part, but I do enjoy putting the work on the walls because it feels like spirit, like in the space. It's very eerie and like, it's cool for me. And then after that, I would suggest also making sure that your show is being written about. So if there's any art writers, art journalists, and things of that nature, please make sure that they're coming out to your openings, coming to your shows, and are able to offer like any advice. I mean, not advice, able to offer any feedback about your show, because that's kind of like your resume. That's you building your repertoire for who you are. And so people can look you up and know, oh yeah, she's an emerging curator. She's up and coming, or they are up and coming. Okay, I'm gonna get into Otherwise Revival. I know we don't have a lot of time. I know we close at 12:15 and I know I can talk a lot, so I'll just keep going. So Otherwise Revival. Kara Lewis, my co-curator, director, and now very good friend of mine, first came to me at my first show, Magician, the Black Body and Portraiture. She came to the opening and she read my catalog, and I had written about Blackness, Black spirituality being more than religion, and spirituality in general being much more outside of religion. It's something that lives within you. And so she read the catalog and asked if I wanted to be a part of this show. Of course, I said yes. It was an amazing opportunity. And so Otherwise Revival is surrounded around the Black Pentecostal movement, which was started here in Los Angeles in 1906 by the Black sharecropper by the name of William J. Seymour. And this is a really big deal because, again, I said 1906, in a time where Black people did not have the basic rights and equality that we should have at this time, and many other people of color. And so why this was so special is because God was able to give this man the ability to speak to a whole group of people. And the people that came to this movement that happened on 1906 were not just Black people. They were people of all different races, creeds, backgrounds, and were only coming because they felt the spirit of this Pentecostal movement. And so we wanted to make a show because a lot of people don't know that history in Los Angeles. And I will even go further and say a lot of people don't know the history of Blackness in Los Angeles. We've been here for a very long time, but there's no real recognition of the contributions that we give to this city, to Los Angeles within itself. And so Kara had the proposal and the idea all ready before I ever came on board. I was just added to it in order to help and to also give my perspective on the Black experience and what that means as being somebody who did actually grow up in the church and have Blackness as a spirituality in my everyday life. And so we started contacting artists as to be a part of the show. And what was really beautiful is that the artists were very open and extremely on board, because some of them had grown up in the Pentecostal church or the Black church, and some of them hadn't, but they were all ready to talk about what was going on, because at the time we started putting the show together before COVID, and then COVID hit. And so everyone was going through a rough time. quarantine had us all in a disarray. And so we needed a little conversation around God and spirit and exploring what spirituality is. And so after that, we just started corresponding, and it got drawn out into a year. A usual show takes about 3 to 6 months to put together, but ours, of course, took a lot longer because we wanted the show to be in person. So we got our list of artists on board, and then shortly after that, we're starting to put the show together and really hoping that it worked out because, COVID. And so all the artwork was being shipped to the gallery. And then finally, the show was opened on April 9th. And it was great because April 9th was the same day that the Pentecostal movement happened in 1906. And so it was really magical. And so what I want to do very quickly, I don't know if I can share my screen. Okay. I'm going to share my screen to a little video about the show so you have a better idea. And then I'll show some artwork that was featured in the exhibition. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions. And if you have any pertinent questions, please feel free to raise your hand in the virtual Zoom hand. Share screen. There we are. Okay. See if I can. In the beginning, I had a show at Fellows of Contemporary Art, which Kara came to visit, which was awesome. And then she asked me if I wanted to be part of this show, and she told me the proposal and how it was inspired by the Azusa Street Revival by William J. Seymour. And we started reading all these books and doing
Jasmine, your video sound went off.
together and what we wanted to focus on, and also. Is it because I muted myself? That was dumb. Okay, sorry. Hold on. Let me go back. I'm gonna play it, and then can you let me know if you can hear it? By the Azusa Street Revival.
We're good.
By William J. Seymour, and we started reading all these books and doing the research for it, and it pretty much just unfolded around the idea of this awakening that happened of the Pentecostal movement here in Los Angeles. Just like along the road, everything just kind of unfolded magically, kind of similar to the movement. We started looking at how we wanted to curate and put it together and what we wanted to focus on, and also include aspects of jazz and music. Then we started thinking about aspects of like space and breath, and how all of those elements were used to praise, especially during this movement, but how they're so alive during this time. There's a moment where we have, as a collective and as people, we have to start really putting ourselves in each other's shoes and being open. And this exhibition, especially with Sean Crawley's work and his writing, which is so profound, but there's a surrender that he talks about that is so vital for us all to be able to understand one another and even get to this point where we can take something commercial and make it human and make it accepting of everyone. What the Pentecostal movement did was do that in real life and create a space where miracles could happen. And I think that's what we need today, is the openness and the willingness to decolonize ourselves and decolonize our mind in the way that we think about art, and bringing things together and actually put humanism and understanding in that conversation. Breaking the table is exactly that, like unlearning all of the institutionalized notions that we learn every single day and are embedded in the way that not only we do business, but how we interact with each other, how we love one another. And I think the exhibition really does attempt to do that and highlight the ways that not only have we seen this happen, but it can still happen, and it's still happening. And even in this moment where we're sitting in a room full of Black artists, which would have never happened a few years ago, and even during the time of the Pentecostal movement, we're seeing the progress of it, but it needs to be continued and decolonized further so we can have a world where this is normal and not anything new.
We've been open a week, and what I've noticed is that people's spirits are lifted from coming to see this exhibition. There's a real joyfulness to a lot of the works. While some of the pieces are coming from a history of marked pain and oppression, there is something about joy as resistance that's evident in these artworks.
Perseverance and the act of faith is what makes not just Black communities, but communities of color in the United States so strong and so like fervent. It's that feeling of spirit that we talk about, because there has been absolutely nothing else that has kept communities of color together other than faith and other than perseverance. It runs through our veins. It comes from our ancestors. It comes from everything that we are, because everything has gone against us to try to destroy us and our person and our heritage, but we continue to persevere because there is nothing else to do. So that was a little video about the show that actually, that was my first time watching it back since since the show, and it actually really does a good job on explaining like the full array of what the show was intended to do. And so I will go ahead and show a few photos of some artwork and kind of go through some of the artworks that were featured in the show. All right, so hold on. Let me go play. All right, cool. Hopefully I can maneuver. So this work in the back, the artist in front his name is Cedric Huckabee. He's an amazing artist. And he made this work. It was accompanied with a paper mache piece that they're supposed to go together. I just don't have a photo of them together. But the piece is called Estuary. And like I mentioned, we were putting together the show during COVID and during quarantine, but what was also going on was the murder of George Floyd. And so this piece was made was inspired by George Floyd, and it's called Estuary because estuary is where the seawater meets the fresh water. It's kind of like a crossroads or a middle ground. And when George Floyd was dying, he saw his mother and was calling her. And what Cedric Huckabee writes about in his explanation of the piece in the artist statement is that we all have this moment of crossroads in our lives where we have our humanness and our spirit and our spiritness that kind of crosses over in between. We've all had different moments of feeling what that feels like, where things feel out of body or just unexplainable. And Cedric does that really beautifully in his work with this piece and giving an ode to George Floyd and what he was experiencing. He also compares it to Jesus when Jesus was on the cross and he was having a conversation with his father. This piece is called Living Sacrifice. It's also from Cedric Huckabee. It's a paper mache of like what it looks like to pray. But it's also in the back, you'll see like nails in the back of the head. They're like, my mouse is gone, but they're in the back of the head there. And that resembles an Nkisi, which is it's an African spiritual, it's a god essentially. And in this object, which is spiritually charged and embodying God energy, you put a nail in it for anything that you might want. So a prayer, or women will use it for fertility, but it needs nails. And so Cedric does the same thing with his paper mache piece here. I'm going to skip over this one. This is by Genesis Tremaine. This isn't the piece in the work, but Genesis Tremaine is an artist. She's a contemporary artist who has like a very Basquiat style, but she is a Black queer woman and uses Yeshua as a part of her medium of creating her work. So it'll say acrylic paint, and then it'll say Yeshua as far as like what she uses to create her work. I'm gonna skip over this one as well. This one is Mama Goma. It's by Dina Lawson, who is a Black photographer and one of the greatest of our times to ever do it. But this piece we wanted to include because mother and child and the relationship between a mother and a child is very spiritual and resembles a lot of tropes when we think about our relationship to God, our relationship to spirit. And Dina shoots this in the Congo, and you see all the different other representations of like Blackness and motherhood and femininity in the work as well. And this is the last one I'll show because I know we're running out of time. This piece is called Namesake. It's by Kentora Davis, totally blanked on her name for a second. And so what Kentora does is she uses proverbs, she uses sub-Saharan proverbs, and she uses stamps and ink, and whatever the proverb says, she stamps it all over to create an image. It's so intricate, but so beautiful. And she has a thing about the process of language and names and the importance of a name. And language was a really big theme of putting the show together because of speaking in tongues and this language of being able to understand each other in a time where understanding each other wasn't a popular thing to do, was important for this movement. And it's important when understanding why we need more Black artists in these spaces and why we need to be creating spaces where not just Blackness, but being inclusive in general is important. We need to open up these conversations of language so we can understand each other. And that's pretty much it. How do I stop sharing this? Okay, sorry. There you go. That's pretty much it on my end. I would love to open up questions. I tried my best to go over an overview for you guys of not only my process, but what curating is, what curating looks like from a smaller, more independent point of view, and also otherwise revival. And I hope that this was helpful, and I hope to answer a couple of questions. Yes. Please, I'm gonna click on you, but please tell me how to pronounce your name.
Can we unmute? Oh, good.
Yes. Okay, wait. How do we unmute? I want to unmute you so bad. Hold on. There you are.
Hi, my name is Esse, and it was so inspiring hearing you speak. I mean, I saw I was so excited to come to this because I just felt like I would connect with you on a different level, being an aspiring young Black artist. I mean, I was gonna ask, like, hearing you speak really made me realize how much I don't know about like what is involved in the business and part of the art industry. And I really want my work to be represented, and like I really want to be part of the Black art community. So I wanted to ask what steps you think I should start taking as a really young artist. I feel like sometimes I don't even want to call myself an artist because I don't feel like qualified, and also the lack of the representation of Black artists as well makes me just not feel as professional. And I don't know, I just wanted to hear what you would like what you would suggest steps I'd start taking to, you know, be represented. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for like raising your hand and speaking and being here. It means a lot. It really does. And this is like, I get very emotional, very teary-eyed, so I'm not gonna cry, but this is like
Me too.
Yeah, like but this is exactly why these conversations are important, and like why it's important for institutions as a whole to open up their space, to open up these conversations, because we're here, we just don't have the access sometimes, and we don't have other people in the community like who can share, because we just don't have the platform. But to get back to your question, I will definitely say, one, that you stepping into your power as an artist is the first step. I recommend that in my art advisory to any other Black artists. Like, you are an artist and you don't need anybody else's validation to tell you who you are and what you love to do. So step into that fully and completely as much as you can. As well as, I can recommend to you some Black owned galleries and Black owned spaces that you can start attending their openings. Just off the cuff, if you have a pen, there's Uta Art Space. They're in Beverly Hills, but it's a really great space. Band Devices, I'm working part-time there as the curatorial like manager there. So if you're ever interested, and we can do a studio visit together, that kind of stuff.
I love that.
Yeah, so Band Devices is one. Where there's so many. I will make a list and then I'll send it to Karen, and then she can send it to everybody. And I'll put my information in the chat too. You please feel free to
I definitely will reach out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but yes, those are like some key things. Definitely start going to openings and start making yourself known like in the world. Go to every show, meet other artists, get a community of other artists together too, because we're all going through the same thing. You're not alone. So yeah.
It was lovely hearing you speak.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Are there any other questions?
I welcome anybody that we're together in this space to at any time want to speak. But I will firstly thank you, Jasmine, for being so open and so personal and walking us through the process of kind of your different moments in your life now where you've made decisions about what course of you're going to take. I have not really met too many people who have made a decision to go to Europe to pursue graduate school. So yeah. I'm curious, I mean, in this context now with students, is it something that you would recommend?
Yeah, I definitely would. I will say that I don't always make the best decisions. So I don't know if that was right or not, but I think for me and what I was looking for specifically and what I liked to do, that it was. So what I would recommend for students is really know what you want to go to grad school for. Like, know if that's the right option for you. And if it is, definitely be open to studying outside of the country, because while I'm not sure if it was the best decision, I do think that on my resume, for a lot of people, it just made me look like different somehow. And not because of it's just the openness to doing something new is also really big. Sometimes people just want to know that you're open to trying things out. As well as my program was very helpful to me as far as helping me to learn about artists and taking my art history education one step further. I fell in love with Flemish artists and didn't even know that I loved it until I was there. Like, I had no idea. Like Rembrandt and all of them. Like, I love it. I love it. I promote Black artists all day, but those are the things that really inspired me to understand what art was. So definitely do your research, but yes, 100%. I paid $3,000 for my program compared to the $80,000 a year that I would have paid here, and it was totally worth it. So, yes, it's a great question, Karen.
Excuse me. And then also your emphasis today on doing homework, which is something that I talk about too. That essay you mentioned, being inspired as a young artist and asking questions. And I think that is the same answer I would give you as well. And I would give it not just to a student, is, go in the direction of what interests you and then go and consume it. Go to the openings, like you say, Jasmine, and go meet people. The more you know about something, I think the more comfort there is in that. That you feel more secure, but you're also you're informing yourself about potential spaces and things like that. So I completely agree. I really appreciate that you showed the video, because the show, and I want it to be recorded, was by far the most impactful and beautiful show that I saw in the last 2 years in LA as a group show. Yeah. And the experience of being there and the variety of work, and then the intelligence in each of the works that you and your co-curator both invested in the work, but then also teased out of the work. It was just such an enjoyable experience for me personally. And I feel very privileged that I got to see the show in person. I want to ask one question. And again, if anybody else would like to come off mic, or even in the chat, add something, please do. I felt like the show that you did was extraordinary. And then the programming was so extraordinary. And if you would even just talk a little bit about, how you brought in the voice and singing and those elements of spirituality to this show that are so foundational. It looks like Jasmine needs to be unmuted.
Sorry, I keep muting myself and then I get into a thing. Can you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
Absolutely. The programming that you did, and specifically with voice and having, I think you had speaker, but you also had live performance, right?
Yeah, totally forgot to talk about that too. As far as curating goes, your programming is so key, because that's how the exhibition gets to live on, as well as the catalog. So definitely in your careers as curators, or hopefully your future careers as curators, programming is everything. But we talked about programming along the way, as well as, as we were putting the show together. And the big thing was focusing on those like notes of the exhibition that might not have been as clear. So music was a big part of that, and jazz was a big part of putting the show on. But it's not something that was like super obvious, I don't think, like in the in the curatorial process. And so we really wanted to highlight that, as well as the programming was also about actually feeling what the Pentecostal movement was about. Like, we wanted people to experience the essence of what the movement was meant to do. And so we did like our last event was like a musical, like a musical live performance of the Is, which is like this like spiritual concept from one of the artists. And we did a talk on process and language with Kentora Davis discussing her work, as well as had a lot of people like from, you know, different places and different backgrounds come and talk about like Blackness and having some conversations around that as well. So the programming was definitely surrounded about making the exhibition highlight some of those key points that we might not have been able to do only visually.
I was very impressed with the range, and there was like a real humanism I felt to the choices that were made, that you supported certain programs. I have one final question, and this is maybe kind of directed towards everybody who's together today. Thank you for spending your Friday with us.
Yes.
So and I didn't prepare I didn't give you a heads up I was going to ask you this question, but if there were a few spaces that you were going to say to the group, okay, these are spaces to check out, like between now and the end of 2021, what are some of the spaces that inspire you in Los Angeles?
Definitely. That's a great question. I mentioned Uta Art Space. They're one that I really enjoy. I'm also a little strange as far as like, I really like the building. Like the building is huge for me. The lighting and how it looks, how big and grand. Like I like all that kind of stuff. So UTA is one of them. Band Devices, like I said, is a Black-owned space that I'm working at that I really believe in and I think would be a great place to check out. Cone Gallery, they are right near Bridge Projects on Highland and Santa Monica. Sometimes they pop in and feature a few artists that I'm like, this is great. Like Chiffon Thomas, she's a sculptor, but she makes really great work. She's a Black artist that I follow that I really enjoy. What are some other spaces? I'm trying to think. There's one like on the tip of my tongue that I can't recall. There's a few in downtown. Oh, Night Gallery. They feature emerging artists, which is really great for any emerging artist. That's a place that you could definitely promote your work. Fellows of Contemporary Art. They also feature like, they're a smaller gallery in Chinatown, but that's where I had my first show. They feature emerging artists and curators are always looking for artists to go there. Museum wise, because I like to add museums in there. I really enjoy the Hammer Museum. It's near UCLA. They featured street artists before, which is like pretty much unheard of for any institution. So that's a space that I always think is forward thinking when it comes to artwork. And there's a few others. I'm definitely going to get a list up together for you all because I can't think super on the top of my head. Hold on.
Well, you gave us a lot. So,
yeah, I gave you a few.
I have not been to UTA.
Yeah.
I have not been to Band Devices, so I have a checklist. I put Cone, I spelled it and put it in the chat so people can see that. And then of course also Bridge Project.
Oh yes, Bridge Projects. They have a new show that opened on the holiday of the Sukkot in the Jewish religion. So definitely go and check that out. That's such a great space. So yeah,
it is.
Yes.
So I want to thank you. I'm glad we got to bring this to fruition together and have you as a guest at LMU. I want to thank everybody in the space today, and your work is inspiring, Jasmine,
Thank
you. I look forward to being together again in some way.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. Thank you everybody for being here and sharing your time with me, listening. I did just put my email in the chat, so write it down while you have time for it before we close out here. And yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you so much for having me. I hope to keep in touch, Karen. It's been really great.